This is the eighth and final lecture. It's a review in discussion. The review will take half the time, maybe 40 minutes or so. And then it's open discussion for whatever you want to talk about with respect to energy, environment, and economics. And I have here, we want to make sure we consider peak oil, energy return on investment, and limits to growth. Okay, so I'm going to review the lectures that we had. The objectives of this course were to understand the earth around us, understand the importance of energy in all aspects of life, not just in terms of power plants and so forth, to honor those who helped us understand, show the role of energy and natural science in understanding contemporary events, especially economics, and to prepare for the future. Now, if you think that this course has been about this material, then I have achieved my objectives, and that's good, I guess. So I showed the picture of washing dishes and made the point that unfortunately energy is usually explained to students only as one chapter of their physics course or part of a physics lab, or that you need to have expensive instruments to understand that. In ecology, which is my discipline, it is considered one chapter of trophic dynamics, meaning food dynamics of ecosystems. In economics, if it's considered at all, it is considered as a commodity, energy like a commodity like pickles or anything else. Instead of what it is a fundamental input to the economy and explainer of almost all economic phenomenon. So we'll talk a little bit more explicitly about that. So energy is far more important than we give it any credit for. Um, Although maybe we might think about it when we fill up our car, I don't know. Now, ancients understood this as well. And if you look at many of the ancient gods, the most powerful gods, the Egyptian Ra, Nordic Zeus, Vulcan, I think was Roman, and Prometheus, who brought fire to mankind, they're all about energy. There was no sense that all of these things were connected in the sense of the ability to do work, but indeed they are. So we can now understand things much better uh, in many ways than the ancients did, although being closer to nature, perhaps they understood a lot of this very well themselves. Now, in the terms of understanding our modern understanding of energy, it starts with this guy, Sadi Carnot, who was a French military engineer, and he looked at the use of energy in a steam engine and drew these diagrams, what we call today pressure volume diagrams, and understood that what you needed for the use of energy was not just energy, but you needed the energy gradient. And a gradient can be a gradient in elevation. So a car can roll down the hill if it's got a gradient of elevation. A gradient in heat is most of our engines are based on a gradient of heat, gradients of pressure. Winds, for example, are the response to gradients in air pressure at various parts of the Earth's surface and so forth. So gradients is fundamental to what energy is about. Uh, the second guy who really impressed me in the understanding of energy was James Prescott Joule. He was the son of a brewer, and in the sort of class-dominated situation of England. His ideas originally were not given much weight, but he did the very basic work that helped us to understand the relation between energy and heat. So he would lift a kilogram 1 meter off the ground with this pulley device, and he would measure the temperature of a box, which he increasingly put insulation around to get it more and more accurate. And he would figure out the amount of heat that would be generated in a given volume of water, or the amount that would be totally generated if you drop 1 kilogram 1 meter. And that helped us understand. And then Lord Thomson, Rudolf Clausius, Hermann Helmholtz, and Lord Kelvin gave us the laws of thermodynamics, which are so fundamental to what we do. This was about 1850s. And the first law of thermodynamics is really quite simple if you put it this way. The quantity of energy is conserved. The quantity of energy is conserved. And the second law of thermodynamics is, however, the quality of energy is not conserved. Every time you use energy, some of it is degraded to low gradient heat. In other words, heat at the temperature or just slightly above the environment, from which one can do no work. So you cannot recycle energy as you can recycle materials, as you can recycle copper. And once these were understood, then the understanding of energy went forward very quickly. My second presentation talked about the early Earth environment, the evolution of life, the particular role of the sun, the resetting of the evolutionary clock by volcanoes and meteorites, the importance of green plants in changing the world by making free oxygen, the adaptations forced on life in an increasingly oxygenated environment, and what we call the ecological theater in the evolutionary play. Evolution takes place in ecological milieu, and that helps guide natural selection. And the evolution of increasingly biotic diversity and complexity and ecological systems. So here's the sun, the source of most of our energy, immediately on the face of the earth. And the other two sources are tides, geophysical, and nuclear fission, or fusion, nuclear actions, which of course are fueling the sun and also the heat in the middle of the earth. The sun, for example, comes in most intensively because of the perpendicular nature of the rays on the equator, and this generates what are called Hadley cells. These large rotating cells of air masses generate what are called the trade winds. So this returning wind, after it has settled back to the Earth's surface about 30 degrees north and south, then moves towards the equator. The Coriolis effect then gives it a easterly or west, in this case easterly, in our case westerly direction, and this generates the main winds of the Earth's surface. And here we are in Oregon that are mostly impacted by westerly winds. That's why our weather comes from the west. A biologist's perspective of all this is that the sun is doing its thing. It will eventually burn out. And as it generates free energy in the form of photons that go off into space, some of it, as it is going to eventually low temperature gradient energy unavailable for work, when it hits something, might take untold billions of years, life intercepts these photons. And this energy then is available to run the what I call the machinery of life. It's all the metabolism that we undertake, every other creature undertakes. And then that too is dumped off as low temperature gradient energy unavailable for work. People call this entropy sometimes. I don't like the word entropy, but that's another, except it applies well to my grandson's floor. But the entropy as it's used sometimes in publications, I'm having a bit of a problem with at the moment, but that's something I'm doing elsewhere. Okay, now something that happened that was really quite amazing was that this life evolved originally running off of some kind of reduced matter. Reduced means normally having hydrogen, and hydrogen is a fuel. And so we had water and CO2 abundant in the Earth's surface, and this amazing stuff called chlorophyll came along. And once it was evolved, it was shared amongst all descendant plants. And what chlorophyll can do is it can take water and split it, which is a difficult thing to do, and energy intensive thing to do, and take CO2 and split it using photons, using sunlight to make sugars, C6H12O6, and free oxygen. That's a waste product. So these plants dumping waste, oxygen waste into the atmosphere completely changed the atmosphere. So you can see it in the rocks of Glacier National Park. These rocks have the gray and the red have the same chemical composition, but what happened at this border was the evolution of green plants that put oxygen in the air and rusted these rocks. So that you're seeing, I think it's ferrous instead of ferric iron that was in the atmosphere at that time, and changed everything for life. And originally, it was probably the largest environmental impact that ever took place on Earth because oxygen is very toxic. But we invented skins and to protect us, and we invented mitochondria to use this oxygen to help us become more powerful, and that's what we did. Okay, and this spiral of life, going through all the geological periods with this tribalates way back there, but all these critters starting and evolving over time and often getting bigger and more complex, at least for a while, but the microbes still doing well, still there. All these marvelous fossils that we get from the past. The Devonian, where's that? It's the age of fishes. Here it is. And going into the Carbonaceous that put down our coal, and Cretaceous that put down our oil mostly. And then periodic things happen, volcanic explosions and meteors that reset the biological clock, but life came back in full force. Tremendous, tremendous ability to get knocked around and come back and generate more life into the future, and leaving us, for example, with birds as representatives of dinosaurs from long ago. It's absolutely, you can hardly imagine inventing such a story. But sure enough, and it seems to work pretty much as Charles Darwin figured out. And so he is resetting the clock, big volcanoes, big meteors. One meteor seems to have done in all the dinosaurs except for the birds. Quite amazing. Okay, then in the second lecture, I also talked about how to measure energy flow in nature nature, how I would run in a small stream in upstate New York. We'd go out and we'd measure changes in oxygen, and here we're titrating late at night. And here's somebody looking at the insects in the stream, taking samples of the insects. Here's another group that's examining the fish, block off a section of stream with two nets and go in with electrofishing gear and take out all the fish that are there, and then put that together in an energy flow diagram. I should have had an energy flow diagram here. And that's one can measure these things. And as an ecologist, I found that absolutely fascinating. Spent a lot of my life trying to do that. The third lecture was about the evolution of mammals, proto-hominoids, that means before people, and our own species, and then the increased exploitation of energy by humans, the evolution of Darwin, and here's young Charles Darwin, and everything since. Everything in biology makes sense in terms of natural selection. Nothing in biology makes sense without natural selection. That's a pretty good statement of which I believe. And here is the evolution of the human skull over time, a flattening. These are our ancestors, Australopithecus, and I can't read that, Homo erectus, and Neanderthal is probably our cousin. And I think if you have European genes, which I do, you're supposed to have 2 or 3% Neanderthal genes. And here we are today with a flattening of the space and a great enlargement of the head, which through evolutionary time caused increased problems with delivering the baby, so that the bones slip when the head goes through the birth canal. Evolution has figured out various ways to get us to have a bigger and bigger brain. And here we are, in theory, understanding all of this. I hope we are. And we got to think of all kinds of things in terms of energy that you may not initially. That we fire is obviously allows us access to plant foods. A spear is a force or energy concentrating device, allowing you to do much more work, like penetrate the hide of an animal. And the wearing of animal skins, meaning shutting us off from the necessary sunlight to produce sunshine, vitamin D, which we compensate with putting vitamin D in our milk in today's world. But still, if you're a hunter-gatherer, if you don't get enough vitamin D, your bones will break. And that's not a good thing. Not a good way to be a hunter-gatherer. And in fact, this disease called rickets is coming back to our young children today because they're not out in the sunshine enough. And here are some people whose lifestyle we think is similar to what our ancestors did. If you haven't seen the movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy, it's a marvelous movie starring these people. And it's very funny. And they can carry all of their possessions on their backs, and they move from water hole to water hole and are very sensitive to the energy return on investment of their lifestyle. They have to get more energy than they expend in getting that energy, and they do. People are thought to have all evolved in Eastern Africa and spread out in different directions. So people from West Africa are genetically as different from the people in East Africa as are Europeans, because it's been as long, more or less, since they left a common area. And as you can see, people have spread all around the world. And here we are. Rather amazing. Now, early agriculture, we focus on the Tigris and Euphrates, but it seems to have occurred in various parts of the world, often in coastal environments where there was lots of food. And genetic engineering has taken place over 10,000 years of people. This was the precursor to corn, to maize, and the seeds. And this is what we have now. Even before we understood genetics at all, humans just kept the larger seeds that they had and planted them for next year. And so this was a sort of forced evolution onto the maize. Fourth lecture, the Industrial Revolution. Here's a Watt steam engine. And the amazing thing is that Watt figured out with a push rod how to change the steam from one side of the cylinder to the other. So he put in steam on this side and pushed the piston up. And then he put steam in this side and he puts the piston down. And each time exhausting the former steam, which has been, its pressure has been dissipated, push it out into the atmosphere. And these saved England's coal mines and then became the origin of railroads and steamboats and the Industrial Revolution in general. Mills were run by these early machines. The skins were made out of buffalo. The straps were made out of buffalo hides. And these gears were very, very dangerous for the women's skirts and so forth. And safety procedures came up, simply putting cases, metal or wooden, to cover the gears saved an awful lot of life and limb. But this happened in Manchester, England, and made a great demand for cotton and contributed to slavery in this country. And it's all connected one way or another with energy. Along came this guy, William Stanley Jevons. I have a book of Jevons right here. Oh, here it is. I've got a book of Jevons called Jevons Paradoxes because he contributed in several ways to good and bad about our knowledge of energy. My fifth lecture was on peak oil, energy return on investment, and limits to growth, all things associated with the Industrial Revolution. This guy, I wonder whether he's America's greatest scientist, M. King Hubbert, whom I knew fairly well at one time. And our ignorance is not so vast as our failure to use what we know. He was the first person, essentially, to suggest that there might be some limits to progress. Everybody was so gung-ho progress in the 1950s, and he had reservations. And he came up with what's called the Hubbert curve, and the idea that over time, the use of any resource would increase initially exponentially, and then reach a peak when about half the resource had been used, and then a decline going into the future. Here was his original graph for the United States, which was initially right on the money, initially. And we'll talk about that. And then these ideas are still going forth in the future. The green line is from one of my own publications with other oil experts, better experts than me. that we are being fooled about how much energy that there is. This is the official estimate of how much oil is left in the world, and the green is when we take the same data and correct it for mishandling of the data. If you're interested in the details, I'll send you the paper, or I'll explain it to you if you want. But anyway, it looks like here's 2020, and this continues to go down. And, you know, the end of the oil age is in sight. No question. Now, the thing where we were wrong, we got completely sideswept, but only in the United States and a little bit in Argentina, is fracking. And now we have huge areas, 10% of Texas and New Mexico and North Dakota look like this, with a well spaced every half mile. This is fracking. It has saved the United States' ass politically and economically. People don't know when they go and fill up their car that 80 to 85% of their oil comes from fracked wells in the United States. And each of these wells now has a horizontal extension that extends for 2 miles. That's 4 times the distance between the wells, which are half a mile apart. And so these are happening massively in West Texas and eastern New Mexico right now. And it has made oil continue to be cheap and readily available in the United States. Here's what conventional oil has done, the green. Alaska has added 10% for a while, but is now diminishing. Deep Gulf of Mexico is important, contributes 10 or 15%, but most of the oil now is from tight oil. Now, this appears to be leveling off. The peak production of oil was during Biden's presidency, not Trump's, at least so far. And it's interesting to see what will happen. My guess is this has got to go down because the price of oil is gone below what you can make a profit for if you're fracking. And these are Stephen Moore and others made estimates of all fossil fuels, a low estimate, a best estimate, and a high estimate here. And all of them peak by 2050. In other words, in another generation. Even if the highest, unrealistically high, some would say, estimate is used, a low estimate seems to be more in line with the data, but it's too early to say. At some point, we don't have the fossil fuels that our civilization depends upon now. Somebody asked about this graph last week. This is the discovery of oil, and this is the consumption of oil. In 1940s and 1950s and 1960s, we discovered much more oil than we consumed. But over time, this consumption has to follow the discovery curve. The integral of this area has to come out of the integral of this area. Think about it if you're at all mathematically inclined. In the past, for the United States, this was the drilling. And over time, I'm sorry you can't see there you go. And you see, initially we drilled more and got more oil, then we got more oil even though we drilled less. And then we had the oil crisis in the 1970s. The price of oil went way up, but our production of oil continued to decline. So for those who say drill, 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 in the past, the amount that we drilled didn't have very much to do with the amount that we found. All it did was reduce its energy return on investment, which you see when you're drilling more, the energy return on investment goes down. You drill less, and your energy return on investment goes up. You start drilling more again, and down it goes. Down goes the energy return on investment. So all you do when you drill excessively beyond what the good geologists say, all you do is increase the energy cost of getting your next barrel of oil down to as low as 5 to 1. This brings up the idea of limits to growth, which we talked about. Are there limits to growth? And I think depletion is going to hit us really hard, even more than CO2. See, the news is focused on CO2, but I think depletion is a bigger problem. And just to show you what all this time, as the energy return on investment goes down, more and more of our output of GDP has to go into getting the energy, using energy to bring energy from the earth into the economy. We like consumption, especially discretionary consumption, which was big in 2007. But as the energy cost of getting energy increases, your discretionary as a percent of GDP has to go down until perhaps in the future it will be far, far less. And so I think this is the most important thing about economics that no economist has any clue about. What about solar? Well, solar might help a lot. Even now, our most important solar is dams, is rivers, but of course it has a price on our fish, and we're even now wind and PV produce only 6 or 7% of the Earth's energy. We're still increasing our use of fossil fuels every year. So I'm very much involved in trying to sort out the energy return on investment of all these things. Now, lecture 6 was on conventional economics. We reviewed the mercantilists, the physiocrats, the classical economists, and the one that's dominant today, which is neoclassical economics. And incidentally, all were focused on the main economic energies of their time. The mercantilists on wind is moving their sailing ships. Physiocrats said all wealth came from land. Classical economists talked about labor. Labor is the energy to assemble things when labor was concentrated into mills to become the largest producer of wealth. And even neoclassical economics of today focuses on capital, but capital is the means of using energy. Capital almost entirely is energy using machines, allowing the transformation, the extraction, exploitation, and transformation of raw materials into goods and services. It is very important to understand that what was considered and taught as economics today is only one of a variety of ways to think about economics. It's almost an accident we think about economics as we do. Here is a review of most important economists. Thomas Malthus said the population would increase exponentially due to the I think he said something like the irreducible passions of mankind, i.e. you have sex, then the population is going to increase exponentially. And their use of resources, he thought, would increase only linearly. Adam Smith, the most important economist, talked about the wealth of nations, and he's often used as a basis for neoclassical laissez-faire economics, but he was a much more subtle thinker than most people think. Karl Marx was widely misunderstood and maligned. He understood capitalism well and communism poorly, it seems. Neoclassical economics is based on solving the diamond versus water paradox. And Stanley Jevons was contributed to this. The idea that, as with water, is that if you only had 1 liter of water, it would be worth a huge amount. But as you have more and more water, it's worth less and less. And this went into the development of supply and demand curves, and an increasingly mathematization of economics, and a almost total ignorance in conventional economics of the role of energy or even resources as anything other than prices. Keynes came along and saved economies for a while because all he said was, when the economy is shrinking, governments should spend more, even if it's a deficit spending. When economies are expanding, governments should spend less, and you'll take the fluctuations out of the economy. And to a large extent, this worked at least into the oil crisis of the 1970s. But when your energy supply is reduced, then everything you think you know about economics doesn't work at all. And I think we'll be faced with this again. Therefore, we need biophysical economics. To give you the two pictures, fundamentally what we say, this is a 33 horsepower harvester in 1910 or so. 33 horses, 5 people to run it, plus stable boys and growing the food for the horses and so forth and so on. And here's a 200 horsepower. In other words, it's 7 times more powerful harvester, and you need only 1 person to run it. Although, of course, somebody has to build the harvester and drill the oil. So dollars and $10 more recently used to say, we'll pay to the bearer on demand $10, but the dollars have no value unless there's energy behind it. About 5 megajoules per dollar, or 50 megajoules per $10. Now, 5 megajoules is about half a cup of oil. Half a cup of oil for every dollar you spend. Think of it. How much is a cup of coffee? And when you buy it at Dutch Brothers or something. This applies to debt too. So we owe all the oil that we have in the ground to pay off our debt. That means there's no oil left for you or me. Unless you have debt. Well, then you have to use it to pay off your debt. So how this is going to work out in the future, I think will be very interesting. And the economists say all they have in their model is households and firms, instead of the whole process of how energy generates raw materials and how humans use more energy to exploit, process, and manufacture the stuff that we consume. This is essential to how we think about real economies. And there's an antidote to all this, book by myself and Kent Plitgard. Where'd our names go? There we are. And there are various organizations you can belong to. If you have deep pockets, we have need for $5,000 to support a study of the Permian, and so forth. And it's just a few people like myself that are trying to figure this whole damn thing out. It's quite amazing because conventional economists pay no attention to all of this, even where it's been worked out very carefully. Okay, questions. Can we make the transition to renewables? Is there enough copper or nickel, cobalt, lithium, rare earths? And what is the increased energy cost of depleting reserves? So I am now going to stop talking until I get a question.
So I have a question, Charles, and it goes back to and it stuck with me this whole time. The picture of the hides from the buffalo. This is Sean running the mills, and to me, when and I just thought about the unintended consequences of innovation. And that it not, and you talked about how when you add, when now that they realized the buffalo hides were as good as I think the Russian buffalo, and there was more buffalo than cows, and you didn't have to farm buffalo, but then you deplete the buffaloes, which did all kinds of roll down economic, cultural, and everything effects. And so is there any study about that idea of, I don't know if it's part chaos theory or the unintended consequences of innovation and how you measure it and how you see all the branches, like the mycelium of a tree or a mycelium underground, how it all branches out and changes?
Wow. Yeah. Um, I have a picture somewhere. It shows a picture of I don't know, Buffalo Bill Cody or somebody with his rifle and saying, "Just give me more money and more scouts, and we'll get you more buffalo." And as the buffalo herds are almost eliminated entirely, and there's a Native American standing next to him saying, "What kind of an asshole are you?" They're all gone. But yeah, and I've got a book. Is it here? It's right over there. I'm going to get it because you gave a very good example that I've been thinking about, and I want to show you this book because it's for somebody in Oregon. It's a good read. Um, where is it? Oh, oh, it's up next to my bed. Um, but it's a forester from originally from British Columbia. I think she went to the University of Oregon, and she very much writes about as a child being intrigued by all of the underground aspects of mature forests. And what you find is that the big mother trees, she calls them, I think the title of the book is Searching for the Mother Trees. And her name I can't remember.
Suzanne Simard.
Excuse me?
Suzanne Simard.
Yes, Suzanne Simard. And it's exactly what you're talking about, that when we come into Oregon and cut down these mature, very complex forests, we destroy all of this networking of mycelium, of various kinds of fungi and bacteria and so forth underground, by which the mother trees feed their offspring. and generate a huge system, a whole complex ecosystem of things interconnecting underground. And then we come in and we put in a different species of trees and the mycelium and new trees don't talk to each other, so the trees don't get enough nutrition, et cetera, et cetera. And how we need to try to maintain the original entire ecosystem underground. And it's a marvelous read. It's sort of more popular than scientific, or is it more scientific than popular? But it's a good read anyway.
She's gotten a lot of pushback from some hardcore scientists who think
Yeah,
she's pushed that argument a little bit too far.
one might say, are you a hardcore scientist and do you have an opinion?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure I'm hardcore or anything, but I'm teaching a course right now on fungi,
Oh,
and we're talking about the common mycorrhizal network and how important. Well, actually, you said that importance of green plants. Well, there wouldn't be any trees on the planet if it weren't for the fungi who help coax them onto the land out of the sea. And 80 or 90% of all the plants apparently are pretty dependent on their fungal input from below underground. So, but I don't think I give a quote actually at the end of my course. I said, this is from Leonardo da Vinci, circa 1495, something like that. And he says, we know about the movement of the celestial bodies, more about that than we do about what's going on underneath our feet. And actually, it's still pretty true.
my wife would, I don't know if you know what my wife, Myrna Hall, but she really is into mushrooms. And if you ever want to take a trip together, I think we'd all enjoy it.
Yeah, I took an ollie mushroom hunting class one time with David Garcia, and but the trouble is people equate fungi with mushrooms, and actually that's like equating an acorn with an oak tree. They're
Yeah.
really there's you can't infer too much from the fruiting body of something, which is all that is making spores for reproduction, with really the body or the organism that's underground.
Yeah. Well,
Looks
our
like
ignorance
Mark has
is
his hand
amazing.
up.
Uh, Mark has his hand up. Mark, you undo your microphone, please. Unmute your mic.
Okay, there we go. Um, I've been an amateur scientist for quite a few years, and my interest has been in earth science and extinctions and currently climate change. And one of the things I've observed about the five major extinctions and another dozen minor extinctions that we've had relating to our course, Charles, is that each one of these extinctions occurred when there was a surge of energy that ended up in the Earth's atmosphere. Now, if we equate matter to being dense energy, then matter in the atmosphere, as well as heat and all that, is pretty much what caused the impacts of the plant and animal life for the extinction. So it's the increase of energy in the Earth's atmosphere. Well, as I look at climate change right now, I try to read both sides of the coin. There's the climate activists out there who we hear a lot of, and most of the media are aligned with it. We're creating a man-made problem here. And then there are hundreds of scientists aligned in the CO2 coalition that point out that, hey, no problem. CO2 levels have been hundreds of times higher. Life has done just fine. So I don't agree with them because there are certain things they don't address for me. But my point is that ultimately the human activity, the anthropogenic heat energy that we put up into the atmosphere is so much greater than what happens in the background between natural events that we are, as has been said, creating the sixth extinction. So how the coalition of climate deniers can say no problem when we're on an upslope of the sixth curve for another extinction in terms of the amount of heat, particulate matter. We put 37 billion tons of carbon up into the atmosphere every year from burning of fossil fuels, and that number is still going up. Now, how in the heck can the Earth bear that load year after year after year, as well as the actual heat that we generate? So I see that I'm definitely not aligned with the climate deniers, and that we've got a problem of putting too much energy up into the atmosphere.
Well, if we were a group of dinosaurs that had evolved our intellectual abilities, and we were discussing the Yucatan asteroid,
Chicxulub.
yeah, that the dinosaurs would be probably say that was a really bad thing. But we, as mammals, have to say, well, without that, we probably wouldn't be here. Well, certainly we wouldn't be
Yeah.
here. So whatever we do to the atmosphere, it might be the dolphins that come out on top next time or whatever it is, might say, well, that was a good thing. And we would say that's a bad thing. So from the perspective of our species, and I have to, I love the earth that I inherited in 1943, and its biodiversity and all that stuff. So I would very much like to maintain the earth as it was when I was born. And so I don't like climate change one bit. And so I agree with you. But I also have to take the long view and say, well, if we're gone and a lot of the big mammals are gone, who knows what's
Right.
next?
Yeah.
And the earth, I guess it was comedian George Carlin that says that we will save the earth. And he said, how arrogant. The earth will continue. Life will continue. Evolution will continue. But the remarkable thing is that we understand it. And I don't know how, we scientists understand it, and I don't know how well that works into the future. So I'm not going to give you a definitive answer on that.
Yeah, I wasn't asking for an answer, but just making an observation. Yeah.
Other questions, comments, thoughts?
Well, you didn't have it today, but I think on the economic lecture, I was struck by the correlation between the GDP and energy reserves that we have in the future. And to me, if you want to convince people we have to change our ways for global warming or climate change versus economics, seems like the economic one should be a no-brainer, that you get more people on board, especially when people realize they're going to have no growth or change their lifestyle. And of course, there's a lot of resistance to that, and they want to deny. But it seems like that seems so apparent. I don't. I looked at those couple of those episodes you recommended on energy horizons and trying to make small changes in people's behavior. And there was one farmer, a rancher in Eastern Oregon. He didn't like the rate of return he got in his panels that he invested in years before, that they're better panels now, for their solar. And he said, maybe we should just wait till the technology catches up with us. But, it's and then there was a representative Boyce from Coos Bay. It was difficult for him to come around to some of these suggestions. But ultimately, like that program said something about one data center could power 85,000 homes. So we seem to be on a death spiral. I don't understand
the first
how
question.
how the economies economic people can't understand and transfer this information.
Going back to Sean's question, I think of people talking about having to have enormous amounts of electricity for artificial intelligence. And I think, what's the function of artificial intelligence? From a society perspective, it's to put people out of work. it seems to me. It's, you know, it's like the original industrial making of clothes and so forth, 200 years ago. And are we investing a huge amount of money to put ourselves out of work? Well, it's pretty hard to get off the train, you know, because for sure the Chinese are pushing AI. Eric told me that he was using AI last night to try to get some estimates of the world population of people of different ages, and it gave him just blatantly wrong answers all the time. Who's to check on the AI?
Yeah.
Well,
I
and
mean, it's, you know, a well-read person, I would still trust much more than AI. But anyway,
well,
what?
you could get down in the weeds to discuss with people whether AI will be good or bad, and people who are trying to promote it as, it can do work, of this or that. But it does, like you say, go back to the point where it leaves the labor, the humans, out of it. I mean, even Karl Marx had two things, the means of production, which is like the energy of production, versus the class struggle. Well, the class struggle now is not even there. I mean, AI is doing it. I mean, I don't know what humans think they're going to be up to,
Well,
what they're going to have.
I think class struggle
Well,
is
it will
all
get
around us.
worse. Well, it'll get worse because the elites will have the energy. And,
Well,
it's
they're
kind of
doing a good
a
job
new,
because they're changing the tax structures so they have to pay even less taxes.
right. And there's no communication about this energy is going to be captured by a certain few people. It's going to be put into a system where we need more and more all the time, like that paradox that you like, the Jevon paradox. And I don't understand because that's the scary part. People can argue about climate change and we believe that it's real, but if you can convince them that we're on this pathway of there are no people have there the class struggle is you will have no power at all. It'll reside somewhere else with has the energy.
Well, unless it's France in 1780 or whatever it was, when the people just took it at some point in
Yeah, but even then, like you were saying, we don't have enough energy to run the society we've created.
oh yeah, well,
And that means like one of the people on that program was saying, well, I don't like the no degrowth crowd. But it almost is we do have to think about degrowth or a different way to live, that we don't need AI, we don't need data centers, and because it's really looking bleak.
Hmm.
Can I jump in?
Ed, yes, jump in.
Okay, so I was reading in the last couple of days about how the Air Palace is actually a distraction from the $5.5 billion that Trump and his family secured on their trip to Saudi Arabia. And Trump's son secured real estate and crypto investments from Saudi Arabia and Qatar. NVIDIA landed a massive chip deal with no clear purpose, and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos walked away with lucrative contracts, etc. So right now, this government is all in on AI, and and I think AI at that point, I mean, if you wanted a repressive society that you completely controlled, AI is the way to do it. It's the whip that's going to keep people enslaved, in my opinion. So I don't know what the answer is, but it doesn't seem like that's it.
Well, I look at what our president is doing, and especially this trip to Saudi Arabia, etc. And it just seems to me that he has no frame of reference beyond that of a business person, and not the best kind.
I think his frame of reference is authoritarianism and totalitarianism. I think that's
I'm
his
sorry, a
frame.
little louder.
I think his frame of reference is totalitarianism. that being in total control. I mean, of course, that's good for your business if you're in total
Yeah,
control,
yeah.
but not good for the rest of us.
Senator Chris Murphy, if you want to look this up, about a month ago, gave a very interesting talk about how all of these things that he's doing, every one of them, gets more money to the oligarchs, to the wealthy. And if he said, if you look at him the way he did, it's just um, a power grab by the rich. That's what Murphy said, and he said it very well.
Yeah.
Christy.
Hi, Charles. I put my question in the chat. So if you could look at it there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you please comment on the
Maybe you should swim, Christy.
Christy, I go back to my formative years in 1960s and 70s when I was before we had national standards on pollution, and I was interested in water pollution. And I was so happy when the EPA came along and generated universal standards for every state. Because before that, some states, let's just say Oregon, I don't know, would have, except it wasn't Oregon, but let's just say, would have stricter standards for pollution, and other states, and in the case of pollution from making paper, New York had stronger standards, and so paper companies would move to Georgia that would have weaker standards. So my fundamental thought is you have to have national standards. But now I find it can work the other way. It can totally flip, because you can have as we're having this year, national standards that are weaker than state standards. And so, unfortunately, I think that you're right, at least for this 4-year interval. Or maybe the states have to go first. California is always first with automobile emission controls. So I have to say, unfortunately, I think you're correct. And Oregon's a pretty strong environmental state, but on the other hand, what's Oregon? There's West Idaho, where I suspect there's not quite as, meaning Eastern Oregon, which is I would guess politically not quite so gung-ho about strong standards. I don't know.
Can you clarify, Charles, whether if there's a federal standard and a state standard, which one takes precedence always?
Well, the federal standard, traditionally, I don't know if it's changing under Trump. Traditionally, the federal standard has overseen the state standard, but may not be the case now.
Mm.
There's tricky stuff going on in terms of, can a judge, even a federal judge, I believe, make a ruling that then holds for the whole country? And the Trump administration is arguing, well, if people object to it, if it harms them, etc., they can take it to court, which means that everyone would have to take it to court, which is just mind-boggling.
Well, my sense is, if there are some energy things that ought to be done, And I think there are, but never mind that. How many people have the degree of knowledge of energy that somebody who has taken this little course have? I mean, what percentage of the population? You know, how many decimal places do you have? It's very tiny.
Maybe you need to expand the title of your course and just throw politics into there as well, Charles, because what strikes me as pretty fundamental to what you're presenting is there's no fine line there. It's pretty much integrated.
Well, my students were always angry at me that I didn't take a stronger political stance. But
Why is it you can't get any traction with The Economist for what you're talking about? How we're on this path of a limited, they want to consider it a commodity that, you know, they're not going to be able to increase production. We're, you know, we're hitting a limiting wall here. Why is it they won't acknowledge what we're coming up against? Regardless of AI, regardless of, you know, climate change, the life as we live it now can't continue like this. Is it they're why are they so captured in another model?
because that's how they've been toilet trained. I think how you're intellectually toilet trained, mostly in your graduate career, determines how you're going to be for the rest of your life. And I really believe that. I was toilet trained as an ecologist, so I have, you know, a sense by observing and measuring nature, I understood limits very well. But if you're raised toilet trained as an economist, in which more is always better, and then that's translated, Carol, that's a really good question. But I've spoken twice at an economics department. I've been invited twice in my life, and you know, 1,000 times by ecologists, but twice by economists at Cornell and at Wesleyan University, a good little university in Connecticut. And they had no argument with me. They couldn't find anything wrong with what I was saying. But it just didn't make any difference. And the reason is this. You know, I spent 13 years in the Ivy League, and I have not that it's terribly different from other places, but in some senses it is. And the economics departments in the elite universities determine what's the criteria for tenure. So it's pretty hard to get tenure in an Ivy League university or any of our major universities. If you're a really good economist, but you don't believe in the neoclassical model, you'll be torn to pieces. And I call it circling the wagons. You know, they circle the wagons and all point their guns out and don't talk to each other. Even though the criticisms, and you can see that in our book, the criticisms were made, the most pungent were made by economists themselves, Nobel Prize economists even. I think Daniel Kahneman just died, but he was pretty critical of conventional economics. And, you know, Leontief was a Nobel Prizer, and he said their models are absurd. And I don't know.
It seems like right now, I mean, with all the DEI supposed cover, I mean, there's just an assault on science and anything that has to do with pollution, environmental protections being wiped away. And it seems like it's essentially a consolidation of power rather than anything to do with reason.
Well, certainly the wealthy don't want to listen to any of this, especially any of the constraints, environmental constraints. They just want to make money, is apparently, I don't know. Well, maybe not. I mean, Bill Gates, he tries to do good things and I think does good things with his money. I've not heard Elon say he wants to use his money to make the world any better. He wants to build a colony on Mars. So if we destroy the Earth, we can go to Mars. I mean, there's just no way in hell anybody can live for long in Mars without getting shipments from Earth.
Well,
Well, there are articles that they want to,
Go ahead.
Carol, then Sean.
well, I've heard, that some of them are thinking of making nation states and islands, somewhere and stuff like that. So they are going to protect themselves in this diminishing energy environment. And I don't know. I think we're headlong running towards, especially 2050. It looks like, unless we miraculously find some more fossil fuel, because anything else, renewables are just on the edges.
I look with amazement at what's happened. I was born in 1943, and the world population has increased by eightfold in my life. What's going to happen in another lifetime? It's just one lifetime. One infinitesimal layer of the Grand Canyon is, well, the modern era, the last 2,000 years. So, I cannot imagine this whole thing holding together for another generation or two, but, generations have come and gone in the past. Yes. Oh, wait, no. Sean.
Go ahead, John.
And then John, or who?
Go ahead, John, and then I'll get.
Well, I'm just going to say on that same point, I did the same comparison you did, Charles, about in my lifetime. I was born in 1941, so I go way back before you, but I got the stat I found out was the U.S. population is 2.5-fold increased in my lifetime, and the world population about 0.3. So it's not 8, but it's
I'm sorry, it's 8 times industrial fuel use.
It's certainly slowing down drastically to the point
Yes.
that we're not doing replacement in many countries. So except Africa and Asia is where the most of the growth is coming.
I stand corrected. Yes.
It's slowing down for sure. But what gets me is, your analogy of circling the wagons and is pretty much the same as the siloing that everybody does, in politics. And you have your standards, you have your point of view of things, and you don't want to hear anything else. And so we get increasingly into our little groups that have something to protect, I guess. And one of the things to protect is just we like the lifestyle we're in, those of us in one silo, and we don't want to share. I think of the 7 deadly sins, I think greed is going to be the one that Deep Six is humanity. As you said, the planet's fine. Things will survive. A lot of organisms, the fungi and the bacteria, they're going to do fine. The cockroaches maybe. But the other, this energy used for things like Bitcoin and so on, which sucks up tons of water. And the AI is one thing. There you can see some potential perhaps use for AI down the road, but things like Bitcoin, why are we taking all that energy and pouring it into something that is not helping most of us do anything?
Well, not to mention war. Look at the Russians shoot 100 missiles at Ukraine every day these days, and they don't even aim at military targets. There's no advantage, it seems to me, to be shooting a missile or a drone into an apartment building. But how much energy did it take to make the drone and to run it, and then the damage caused, and I don't know if anybody's ever going to be able to rebuild Palestine. It's just crazy.
Yep, and those are a lot of our armaments that are being used to do that.
Yeah.
sold overseas.
No, I sit there and wonder where all these munitions are being made.
I think Russia, if it weren't for the oil that they make revenue from, they're not a wealthy country at all.
No, their economy is about that of Canada.
Mhm.
Wow.
That's including the oil, huh?
Well, including, I mean, their total economy is, but it, where do they put it? We put our energy into mindless travel and taking jet planes here and there just because you're bored and so forth and so on. And we have, I think, 7 generations of clothing in our closets. Because of style
that brings me
changes.
back- So that brings me back to, I'll give it a real brief scenario, but so I was potty trained probably on the social work background. I was in social work. My mother was in social work with a heavy dose of Vietnam. Let's go back to the land, be a hippie. And so I ended up in Oregon in the early 70s, and we went back to the land and we built our house with low energy. We didn't want to make noise, so we used bow saws and hand saws and crosscut saws and built a log cabin for ourselves. So very, very physical energy. If you go back to, I don't know what economics fact study that was, but we did not use fossil fuels to build our house. And then we decided we didn't have money to put in electricity because we didn't have any electrical things. And so if you wanted to bring electricity to your land, it was thousands of dollars because they looked at how many things you could plug in. So we had kids and we wanted to put our money into books. So we decided, okay, we're going to raise our children without electricity, and we had kerosene lamps and we had wood stoves, and we did that for a number of years. And every time we wanted to put in electricity, it was still way too expensive, and we wanted to put our kids in college now. Well, eventually, a few years ago, when my house burned down and my first husband died, my son said, "Okay, look, you're getting older, Mom. You need to have electricity." So it was still too expensive, ridiculous to bring it in. So we put in solar and hydroelectric. And so my house is all run over solar and hydroelectric. So going back to the social work part of it and how we end up using more and more because we have more energy. So now I had solar, now I have electric. I buy a toaster. I buy a hair curler I can curl my hair with. I have dual screens instead of one screen. So now I'm creating more need because I have more energy. And even though it's off grid and everything else, I'm thinking in terms of what am I doing to the land because now I have energy available to me. And so so then I go back as a social work. What is it that when you have energy to do things, you create more need? The 5, seasons of clothes in your closet, or in women's case, five sizes of clothes. So when you go fat, skinny, So we have, that one. So, so as a social work, some of that is the going back to what is it that we need to look at as a society that creates our over dependence on creating more, which means more energy, which means, climate change. So that's my 2 bets. But yes, but I have dual screens. I'm talking to you in dual screens, and I'm using up electricity, even though it's solar and hydro. I'm creating my own energy drain.
Well, I was a fairly potent scientist, so that means meetings and different countries, and so when I was early 20s, and I first began to understand this, and I said, and we were down in North Carolina, University of North Carolina, and about half of the graduate students in my department were more or less hippies and leaning that way, including myself. And the other half were hardcore business types or whatever. And some of my friends, Jack Stanton, and his wife Wilma, they did what you did and so forth. But he had no impact on society. He lived out in the boonies of North Carolina, and my friend John Day visited him, and he said the kids were running around barefoot and dirty, and they seemed happy, but they didn't have any impact on society. And so here I've pretty much used electricity and jet fuel my whole life. And but when I was 20, I figured, well, the thing I can do that will make the most difference is to not breed.
Really?
And so I have no children to my knowledge. And I still think that's about the only. Now, I think I like classical music a whole lot, and my favorite composer is Gustav Mahler. And Mahler in 1912, and much is going wrong in his life, but he's noted as just a remarkable conductor. And but nobody particularly played his symphonies. And may I say to any of you, just listen to Mahler's Fourth Symphony and see if you like it. And so he said, and then do the second and third. But anyway, he said, I'd love to conduct my symphonies in 50 years. But he died the next year. But then 50 years, almost exactly later, Leonard Bernstein, whom I assume you all recognize as perhaps the greatest musician the United States classical environment has ever produced, he started with Mahler's symphonies, and both of them became famous. So I have a fellow who wants to write a book on my life, and I think my recommended title for it, and he's young, he's 27. And so I say, well, maybe you can, in 50 years, people will be.
Oh, I'm
very
losing my
interested in
internet. Sorry.
understanding energy
Thanks for a
return
great
on
class. I'm
investment.
taking off.
Huh? And so in 50 years, he might be able to write this book. And then the world might be ready for this. But, the world wasn't ready for Mahler, and I don't think the world is ready for energy return on investment or biophysical economics.
Before we quit, I just wanted to recommend a book called Survival of the Richest. It's written by a guy named Douglas Rushkoff, who was an internet journalist, or is an internet journalist, who studied it for the last 50 years. He was invited to give a talk, and he thought he was going to give this talk to people who were interested in the new trends and AI and all that kind of stuff. He wound up with 5 people, 2 billionaires and 3 millionaires. Their only question for him was really, where should we build our bunker? Should it be in Alaska or New Zealand? And so the whole book is trying to understand their fantasy that they can survive the destruction that they are causing. And all the things like we're going to the moon and the space programs or whatever, that has to do with boondoggling the government as far as I'm concerned. It's not in any way realistic, I don't think. And the rest of us, of course, I mean, one of the strategies is depopulation. You see it in the things that they're cutting. Medicare, anything that will help people to survive is what's targeted. So I think it's kind of bleak, and their fantasies are crazy.
I don't want to leave us on that tone, even if I might agree with you.
Charles, can I break in with one thought about that? I think, and with Carol making her point about where are we going, and we're going to run out of whatever. I think we're going to eventually devolve into a simpler way of living. It's just a question: do we have to go through Armageddon to reach that point? And I think that's
well, with 8+ billion people, I don't know how we can avoid it.
I think you don't get any traction with your thought because it's too explosive. It's too scary. I mean, I'm thinking people just want to kind of turn away from it because it's so eminent. I mean, you can't really deny the limitations
Is there a
of,
solution? Is there a solution? And I mean, that's one of the things that we've learned a lot, and I'm thankful for it. And I think we've all known that we're sort of we're marching toward this end, but the solution is lacking. Conservation won't do it. How do we get to a solution? And I think the impossibility of a worldwide solution is nil. So
Yeah.
well, just looking at that program you recommended, the Energy Horizons, working so hard to do what little they could do and the pushback that here and there, I mean, I keep thinking about that rancher. He was put in solar, which is great, but now he feels like he invested in panels that are not as efficient as ones now. So he says, "Oh, we should wait till technology gets better," and
I think
I don't know.
I think that basically Biden's plan of solar as much as we can, and then when the time comes to tighten our belt, we're just going to have to do it. And I think it's physically possible, almost easy to do it, but not unless
You mean
we recognize the
to
problem.
replace? You mean you
To
you think we have the
maintain a
ability?
modest industrial life, not with lots of jet travel, and not with Route 5 going all day and night. But I think it's quite possible that we can feed ourselves and uh, have decent housing and have education and healthcare. I think we can do all of these things, but it requires dividing the pie more equally. And I think the pie is large enough and can be made smaller, but not if 1% get half the pie, which is the case right now.
Right.
But you do think we have to have some degrowth and have
I
a
think
different
it'll be forced upon us eventually.
right. So we have to have that, and we have to have renewables. We have to have the idea that we are going to have to live a different lifestyle. Absolutely, that's part of the
Yeah,
plan if we're going to survive, and we have to come up with
And
more
all kinds of
sources
people
of energy.
included that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, but it just seems like when you hit people with this degrowth, that they don't like that.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
I
one
really
piece
am.
that it's really rattling for people.
John.
Charles, I'm sorry I missed a few courses of a few of your lectures. I don't know.
They're all easily available on the link I sent you.
I just was wondering whether you covered much about nuclear options, nuclear power, in the smaller units that they're discussing now about using nuclear power as a reasonable substitute for fossil fuels.
I have well, first of all, I've worked at 2 nuclear labs at Oak Ridge and Brookhaven. So I'm very familiar with all that. Until recently, I've been pro-nuclear, sort of. But here's what my new way of thinking about that is that to have, and I like the idea of thorium reactors, and my step grandson is very enthusiastic about, he wants to go to Oregon State and get an engineering degree in thorium reactors, essentially. And I encourage him because you don't get the horrible side products. But if you're going to have any kind of nuclear that's going to save the atmosphere, you've got to do it on an enormous scale. And that means you have to train some 2 million or whatever nuclear technicians and engineers and whatever. And 1% of 1% of them will hate you and me or somebody and will learn enough to do what's called a dirty bomb. I mean, making an explosive bomb requires a huge industrial infrastructure, but it doesn't to make a dirty bomb. And you can put a cup full of plutonium or less, a teaspoon, on a barge full of ammonium nitrate and sail it into some city and eliminate that city. And I think once that happens, then the policing of the world will go up by an orders of magnitude. And so I have another new this month, a new concept that I think we should give it a shot, which is if you drill down 4 miles and frack the rocks, there's enough heat, and if you use as a closed loop cooling fluid pentane, you can get superheated steam at the surface to run a turbine and make electricity with a rather huge initial investment, because you got to drill twice the depth of a oil well, and the cost goes up exponentially if you know how drilling works, because you got to pull all the old pipes up. But with the new fracking technology, we can frack hot rocks and heat some working fluid like pentane and generate a huge amount of heat to make electricity at the surface, and then home heating heat secondary from that. So I'd rather do that because it has no accessory problems. Doesn't interfere with the atmosphere, doesn't interfere with nuclear waste.
Something new I hadn't heard much. Well, I know about geothermal, but that sounds like geothermal squared.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some few people are talking about it, and in thorium reactors, I'm also interested in, but only under the position of constraint.
Yeah.
Not can we build this up and grow indefinitely. The trouble is every politician runs on more. Is there any politician that runs on less or the same? No, they don't exist. So I don't know how to get around that corner.
Yeah,
So
it seems like the political issue is really this.
on us in the year 2000 with peak oil, but fracking gave us another 20 years, 30 years.
Right, and a lot of the things that were in the ERA, which are now being rolled back, I mean, would have at least extended the time before, the world came crashing down. And so I think, and people are, when they see that they have to do something, they'll do it. But right now we're faced with a political blockade.
Well, what is a Menschel said this, or somebody from the Midwest? Don't ever expect somebody to believe something when his job depends on him not believing it.
Yeah, right.
Who was it?
You're thinking of
Mencken or Sinclair Lewis or somebody.
mhm.
I love Sinclair Lewis. Have you ever read Main Street?
It's Upton Sinclair.
Ah,
Yeah.
Upton Sinclair. Well,
Hey,
it's now
Charles.
officially time for the end of our course.
Thank you
And
so much.
any of you can email me anytime. If you haven't looked at the Energy Futures series, Eric has put it on our site, I think, which I've given you the link to. And if it doesn't work, just shoot me an email or call me up. Or I live at the middle house on Old Mill Road off of stop by and I'll give you a beer on the porch or whatever you'd like.
Is
I
the site available to anyone or just to members of a class?
Anyone.
Okay.
And if you like the lectures and you feel that there's especially a young person who might like them, just send them the link, and Eric has arranged it so you can see that all. And if you want to go back, there's somebody who goes back and looks at the PowerPoints, and they're available there too. And I'd love to hear from you anytime, and I will try to I can Zoom with you or meet on our porch or whatever.
Charles, if we want to read
Like,
your biography, of course, when that comes out, you'll let us know when your biography comes out. And I'm
I'm
guessing
gonna be dead.
I'm getting that 27-year-old guy might be your long lost son. Who knows?
Who's my long lost son?
One who wants to write your life.
Oh, maybe.
Thank you. It was really informative.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thanks a lot, Charlie. I look forward to seeing you and getting that fly.
Okay. Goodbye to
Very good.
everybody. Bye.